There are, but you don't have that factor, which is huge. And but the other one is the forestry, so that seasonal impact. So if you're chasing visitor numbers as impacting on rural unsealed numbers, yes, there is a weird factor, but the biggest thing is truck numbers, and that's the thing you chase down. So you want to know what your truck volumes on passing the neck of the car, where they're turning, because where they turn is where they drag the road and scuff in and out of park gates.
So we have an undertaking to monitor, because you've got the ability to monitor
Consents.
Yeah. Have we got, as part of the safety plan, a proposal to monitor some of these in the worst roads in the rural areas?
We do, yeah.
There's information from Perry Council came through along.
Yeah, that's on NCTA, that's on.
Yeah,
It's not our area.
No.
But no, we do. But what I'm saying is it's the truck numbers that, and right now you have, apart from your biggest risk in terms of truck numbers is forestry. So we've got a rotation forest that's now 24 years old, trees are ready to be harvested, and they go in for 6 months, pull all the logs out, hammer the shit out of the technical term, the piece of road, and then that piece of road will never be revisited for 24 years. But trees are growing. So it's an episodic impact. You haven't got
As part of the consent, do we have any remediation as a result of an additional road truck?
in part, that's the part of the rural roading reserve was to do two things. One is emergency works, but also to be able to compensate for some of those issues, which
Seems economically disadvantageous to the rate.
but I'm just again, there's a lot of speculation about car numbers, and yes, they have an effect, but it's trucks that actually make the biggest difference on your unsealed.
Okay, look, overall, I'm quite concerned about even our initial rates rise, and this is adding an extra impact. So on balance, if I could have an assurance that we build all these safety measures in, start tracking numbers, trucks versus a program for that, and looking at speed in the next year, I would probably be comfortable doing.
You're allowed to have a dissenting opinion.
No, I think the look. It sounds good that we're looking at if we can look at what we can do further along the track. So yeah, that's great. But the reality is we don't have any figures on so what that looks like. So what they, because Katrina's only just hearing this now as well. So with putting the additional. So what would that rates increase be? Do you know? So if instead of sealing the rural roads, what would the impact be if the amount was just for the
60,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it would be much the same as the EBDs on an increase of 60,000, so 0.41%. So you go take your original figure for the consultation document and add 0.41%.
Instead of the 1.90.
Pretty good gauge figure.
So 0.14 instead.
That's instead of being the 16.95. That's about which figure is it?
So the second column is what we went out with.
Yeah, so 16.95.
It's 16.95 plus 4.41.
So 16.3. 17.3.
Yeah.
17.3 as opposed to 18.47.
Yeah.
17.3. Yeah, it's a lot, isn't it?
No difference. It's really
Yeah. Yeah. I'm finding this one a little bit tougher for me. I think with the amount of rural roads that we have, I think 1K, if it could be, when if there's the assurance that they're going to go out and seal the areas that are dangerous. It's very hard though, because we keep hearing that no one's got proof of what's dangerous or not, and so that to me sounds like almost we're not going to do it. So because no one seems to be able to prove anything. So Whereas at least if we know that we put it in, that we are going to do a ceiling of at least, you know, of 1K per year, rural roads will still be getting some kind of traction. And the reality is, I look here in the South Wairarapa district and we have, as has been pointed out, a lot of rural roads, and I don't think that it would be fair, especially with what rural pay and what they also put towards urban, if we were to take this out and still leave footpaths in. So my feeling is, if we're looking at footpaths, we need to put this in.
Awesome. I've just got a couple of points. First, in terms of the dollar thing, I'm not quite sure why we're focusing on lifestyle. The difference between $4.53 and $6 for lifestyles. I'm sorry, we need to look perhaps more at rural, where it's going from $8.41 to another to $16. You know, let's say where the cost is actually running. And it's on the rural people who have been living there all their lives. They're used to driving on unsealed roads and know how to drive on these roads. The problem we've got right now is people who say, I come from the country, or I come from wherever, I'm going to move into the countryside and what a great seal of life, and then complain about the very life they're living. I'm sorry that, you know, you can't move into the country and then complain about tractors, because that's what they're doing effectively. So I don't have a lot of sympathy for that at all. I have a huge amount of sympathy about this proposal for the people who are actually generating the income that has made these places really nice for the lifestylists to live. The second point I would say is in terms of safety, and Harry has addressed my safety concerns, which I raised yesterday about vomit. I'm more than comfortable about looking at safety, and from a district-wide perspective, reducing the speed limit seems to be a far better way to do it. I'm not going to be around when we seal 286 kilometres of roads, and my children aren't going to be, and probably their children aren't going to be. So really, what are we spending money on? So I would rather see the safety for the whole district than just for one or two lifestylers who have moved into a district and could say, oh, this is a bit rough, I don't like it because the helicopter is flying and the things are running. So,
Okay. Jimmy?
Well, given I came in late, I actually, I'm pleased you've discussed the safety issue, because that was a concern, you know, Rural Cross Road, but it is bad. But my view was always been, we've got a lot of other roads that have got a lot of other safety issues.
Yeah.
And given that where I live, I was the biggest ratepayer out there, and I was the last to get the seal in front of the road, simply because it was a straight stretch of road, and it was a safety. And then when we got special purpose road, that was when we got the seal. Otherwise, if we hadn't got that, we'd have been still struggling. So I take the view that safety first, and we need to actually explain it properly, that we're not abandoning everything completely, but we're taking a holistic view of all our roads and concentrating on the issue. So yeah, that's where I sit.
And I myself, I said, JP, I take on point the dust problem, but the reality is it's going to be 2282 before we have a dust problem solved through chipping away 1 kilometre a year. And the dust problem, I think, needs to be addressed as it comes up with regards to cycleways. But that's a totally separate discussion as our cycle network increases, and I think that's for another LT. And I'm just concerned at the moment regarding the rates increase and the actual benefit for the increase. So I would be happy to change my opinion from this time.
So I would agree with Alistair that really the biggest concern in terms of rates increase, I'm not worried about lifestyle, but if you look at the jump in rural from 7-ish to 13.69, pastoral from 7.5 to 14.3, it's a huge jump. And they're already paying large rates anyway.
So to wrap all this up, and we're only still at the direction to the to council officers that we're actually now looking at on balance, removing that from the expected rates increase.
but to develop a budget for
And but
safety.
replace this with a safety review and accelerated speed change.
Actually, guys, you can put your hands on your hearts here and say, what was effectively happened? People have come and said, this is the solution to the problem. So they've kind of said the problem is safety and those types of things. They said that to you. You're proposing a solution to the safety problem. So you've got you've got a very plausible response to the problem which can't solve it. They've said the solution is to seal roads. Actually, you want to deal with 260 kilometres of unsealed road and for the best bang for the buck to resolve the safety issue, you just make that decision.
Doesn't we discuss the on safety? If we go out and do this work on the road. You know, they do their-
Yeah, and that's the really part of the budget, which is around that low cost program. So this, but remember, safety improvements are not necessarily sealing.
Yeah.
They can be a guardrail, they can be a raising an area where there's a dip and to keep water from flying across the road. It can be guttering down the side of the road and an energy dissipator, so you don't end up with water flowing across the road, which big problem. Yeah, so there'll be a whole lot of safety improvements. But don't just make the assumption that safety improvement on unsealed road will be seen. There's a whole lot of things, the protection too.
We've discussed that now.
Yeah.
Guys, is there anything else from the LTP yesterday you'd like to discuss? There, I mean, we have got some figures there from additional spend that has come in, or are we just comfortable that we, a lot of that is going to be what we need to do?
So can we just, the solid waste officer, I don't recall talking about that. What are we talking about here?
We had a solid in the role. This is something we planned for year 2 going forward, and we have Bryce, an assistant Bryce needs in the increasing importance of waste within council. He has identified the need for that to be brought forward. Want to speak to that a bit more?
Yeah, so this is around, well, there's closing issues there in terms of workload and stuff, but really it's around the increase in waste levy and the need for us to basically improve the amount of recycling not sending to landfill and all these sort of waste management projects. We simply don't have the capacity to do those effectively in the first year, and that's going to really start kicking into it. The waste levy is going to progressively increase over the next 5 years. It's about bringing it forward because we simply don't have the capacity to do the administration, the management, the contract management, and implement initiatives to reduce waste going to landfill, unless we bring forward that funding to do work.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? I'm not sure whether Harry or Ewan will answer this. We at the moment pay part towards Jodine's, who is the waste officer for the councils, and are we going to continue with that, or are we just going to have our own waste and stop funding go?
Because of the nature of the contract and the approach that we need to have to regional basis, we need to have somebody that's going to coordinate and work across all the councils to do that. It would be in addition to that. That's what we propose.
Is there, and I think this is probably even higher level, the levy is supposed to fund council initiatives, waste reduction. Is there any chance of getting some of that levy to council from the MFE?
So the waste minimisation levy is there for project work, it's not to cover salaries. So if you go, okay, I want to put recycling hub or out at some rural location, they will cover the cost of that, but they don't actually cover the cost of the staff.
I think that's a great conversation to have in another meeting.
But the main reason is yes, bringing that work forward, but if we don't do that, it's going to fall on price, and that's not fair. He's under the pump. And so we business can't just add another task to it. That's why
I don't think you'd bring it to us unless you do it. Normally we're out.
So Harry, looking at it another way, by moving that position forward, is it likely that could mitigate some of the costs of the additional levies? You could take it out of that. Do you see what the trade-off?
I
See what I mean?
think because it's capital, I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I think it's hard to be disingenuous to go back and say yes. I don't think it will. I think what the subsidy, what the levy is about, was Katrina said is operating. So you'd have to envisage some form of capital activity that would reduce the amount of time that people spend on this.
I think also this is preemptive work to make sure that we don't get slammed and we're not ready for the waste reduction, landfill reduction. So.
Well, let's do climate change, it's a whole.
I don't
Yeah,
have a problem
yeah,
with that at all.
Because we're bringing this forward, do we physically have someone in mind for the role?
No, we'd have to advertise for it.
Just,
Looks like a great job.
Running around rubbish.
But I might
You've done it.
apply. Don't cancel and apply.
Discuss footpaths again.
No.
Are you going to?
If you wish to, we
Well, I just sort of picked up on this, what Pip was saying, that if we're looking at not doing the seal, are we better what to, should we be looking at, so not just funding?
I took that on board, but the reality is we are looking at a ratings review which should address the footpath anomaly. And that will be next year.
Sorry, Alex, the rates review is going to look at all issues, but it might not.
It might not,
The
but
model.
Yeah.
And we are different costs that.
I would certainly hope that would address anomalies like rural banks and clubs and footpath.
Yes, but it might be offset by something else.
Indeed.
So there's a lot to consider on the rating review, and I would not like to sort of preempt any sort of.
Can I also make a point on footpaths that we do have a requirement for people who are mobility impaired or whatever, and right.
Age concern.
Age concern.
And especially, I found it interesting about the commercial areas in town. And the commercial areas,
I think, yeah.
that being looked at.
So at the moment, I don't think, unless there's a particular redirection or extra information you need on that, we need to get the spatial plan looked at. But is there anything that's make it likely for you to change your decision or your direction from yesterday?
No, just like to pick up on Pip's point.
I think
Funding wise.
is oddities.
Yes.
But we still need to do footpaths with our agreement.
So just remember that the footpaths are being more than 50% out of the reserve, the infrastructure reserve.
So it's not, we're not taking the whole 400.
No, so the impact will only be 200,000.
Oh, okay.
Didn't,
Alex, could I ask
Right.
about this developing a new road into Greytown Cemetery? Because
Yeah.
that wasn't part of what we've
Indeed.
got.
Yep.
And that's 200,000.
It's quite a large amount
Amount,
of money.
yeah.
Yeah.
Just for a driveway.
Yeah.
Well, I need to talk about, so I don't.
I'm sorry.
We'll bring it back.
So effectively, we've got to open up a new area in the Greytown Cemetery, and that's become more apparent that we need to do that sooner rather than later. And so part of that is that we need to put a road through.
Is there something that could be delayed?
According to the amenities manager, no. However, I could go back.
Look, very good point. Could we just look at the urgency and whether this has to happen in year 1 versus year 2 or 3?
I think the issue is, I can talk a little bit about this, is we're full. And we're losing the ability to plant people because we don't have the plots available. So unless we open up a new section of cemetery, we need the road to be able to do that. We actually can't conduct burial.
Yeah, we just probably look at what plots available, demand, etc., and just make sure of
And
it.
people keep dying and people want to be buried.
Indeed, but we need to look at what's available and the timing of that, just make sure that the.
That's the
decision
issue.
robust. Yeah.
No, that's the issue, that we don't have the plots and the roading network available to get people there to be buried.
We haven't got them now.
We've got the plots, but we haven't got the road network to actually get there. And we're full up in other parts of the cemetery. So if you purchased a plot and you want to be buried in a particular place, we can't get you there at the moment.
It would just nice to get some direction whether this could limp along for another 12 months.
We
I know this is delaying.
We own all the land, but
It's not the action to the road.
Whatever check.
And so that's another 200,000 that goes into.
You start in 6 months' time to
Yeah.
6 months across this year and 6
Carry on,
months.
carry on from the line way down.
So we might be able to spread it.
Yeah.
Okay, and then can we look at the last one, what refuge,
Guys,
what refuge station upgrades? I know this is only a small amount, but what actually are we doing? Are we opening them longer, or are we actually doing work on them? Or?
So what that cost is, it's quite minimal, but what it is there's new requirements for us to store oil in specifically designed containers, and also to have paint under a shelter. So that's a requirement that's coming in very soon. So it's to do that.
To do that.
And that's actually literally just come onto the radar in the last couple of weeks.
thanks, Governor.
Yeah. No, that's
Yeah.
Can we take a comfort stop?
Right, fine, we'll make a comfort stop for 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Water
today, not coffee.
10, actually, it might be morning tea time, but. Michael, we'll do a quick, we'll stop for morning tea and then we'll come back to look at spatial. Thank you very much.
Well done, team. Good discussion.
Yeah, great.
Question.
Karen Yates used to steal beer mats.
Quick way to shut your ass, no, sorry.
Farah, you've been incredibly patient. Yes. You thought this was in spatial plan. Alex, just a point of clarification. The lady didn't die, she was in rehab.
Oh, really? Okay.
Oh, she drove over a side of the cemetery.
Yeah.
Terrible.
Yeah, there was a friend.
Oh, it's been a sick change, so you're ready for.
Yes. Do I need to have a motion to remove myself this year?
Oh, no, I can see that. It's all good.
Yeah.
Do we have any special objection from councillors on Deputy Mayor Evans taking the chair?
Not at all, it's very encouraging.
Right, now I'm in the chair, so I'll take, thank you.
Yeah.
So we're moving on to the spatial plan, and I think we lead off by Russell.
Thank you. Yeah, so the framework for this session, we thought we'd give you councillors a quick overview, even though you've received Kendall's good summary on the spatial plan and residential growth options. So give you a general overview and then allow enough time for each of the towns, examine each of the towns. Again, giving you a brief overview when we get into each of the towns, and allowing for discussion and deliberation around what we've heard from residents and what issues we have at hand. The only other thing I was going to say is that as part of this, spatial planning and growth work can be quite a nebulous topic. And we would come across things of helping our decision making, maybe around logical positioning for an area, connectivity of an area to an existing area. Maybe the challenge of more testing of some land, we're asking for more technical knowledge about soil. There'll be the timing questions of what areas bringing some areas forward or others. It might have been something that you've also heard. Other little prompts might be actual soil viability, when people say, oh, that growth shouldn't go in that area, it does have viability. And then the other thing that's popped up is the inclusion of other sites closely allied to growth areas which have been put out as options. So here's some of our considerations as we get to discussion. But just as a summary, So we received 5 themes. Well, firstly, we received a good amount of feedback. 213 submissions is pretty good for a small council.
Can you give us an idea of what other councils have had with regards to those sort of levels of consultation on zoning?
Rotorua had about 300.
Wow.
So they had quite a big process, but formally they received 300 submissions.
It's a big city.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's 70,000.
Yeah.
Kendall went to New Zealand Planning Institute conference and there were speakers there in terms of their growth work, but they didn't have any.
Yeah, they were amazed how much consultation we'd had. I think for that first lot that we got last time was roughly 700 responses, and that was because it was with the LTP. But we'd even this time 200 compared to what others have had is a lot. Some of the other spatial planning exercises, they had basically done all this work and had made decisions but hadn't consulted the public yet. So I think that there's different processes taken. Yeah, just to compare with other places. So I think we've done quite well to get that level of response.
And a regional context, Wellington Regional Growth Framework, with their work in terms of consultation, they've had a very low level. So they've asked for feedback on what we've received, so, and that's been shared with them through Karen and myself. So I think we can be reasonably pleased with the number and breadth of feedback.
Well done, guys. Well done.
Yeah, good work.
So as I say, we received 5 themes, some of them not surprising. Consideration around heritage, intensification topic itself, productive soils, giving thought to that, population and different views around population and infrastructure provisioning. So 5 themes. Mid-residential, in terms of what was most popular, it's the topic that isn't as controversial as others. Development of mid-residential, i.e. Ongoing mid-residential development within the existing towns, such as ND, the Martborough, and GF development generally within the town for Greytown, along with consideration of that opening up in terms of opening up new areas for mid residential type development. MF, Ferry Road, Martborough was seen as being favourable, and that Jellicoe to Papawai, GB and Greytown was seen as potentially favourable as well, and also that applies in terms of Greytown for Woodside Station in terms of delivering a mid-size, mid-density solution for the future. The area GB, which is Papawai to Jellicoe, was seen as needing some further consideration in terms of soil productivity before any growth occurs there. And in terms of the Martborough context, MA, that's our Oxford outer area, it was generally supported. But as you would expect, there was a mix of views as to what is suitable or appropriate density within that given area if it was to go ahead. And in terms of Featherston as a whole, comfortability with Featherston being a growth node as identified in the Wellington Regional Growth Framework. So that was heartening to hear. And overall, Kendall summed it up in terms of growth was supported as long as it was within the right location of the right density and designed well so that the values of the towns aren't overly compromised.
If I could comment, to you, Mr. Chair, only 10% of submitters were from Featherston, which is quite, well, What went wrong there? I mean, while it's probably still more than some councils get, it's still a pretty low ratio. And also I'm seeing quite a lot of don't knows there on supporting that. Yeah. Did we?
A lot of those don't knows came from people not wanting to comment on the town they didn't live in.
Right.
So I've broken those down. There's two diagrams there, one that's on whole and then one that's just from residents. And you'll see a lot of those don't knows are reduced. Another reason why I received don't knows or a lot of no's was because we put forward the combination option. So we said this option includes something Martinborough ME, MD and MA, but a lot of the comments or views people had were about one specific area and they may not have liked that combination.
So possibly our offering each time would be slightly different as in broken down with choice as opposed to.
Yeah, about specific areas rather than combining them. So yeah, that's where a lot of those don't knows and no's came from. But when I went through and analysed them further, we went on each option, which
Would it be fair to say that the Featherston issues are not as complicated potentially as the other two towns, and therefore it's easier to?
I think it's a bit Karen.
I think that's a good comment. Karen.
So just wanted to add that I don't necessarily see it as a failing of engagement. Sometimes it's actually a reflection of very, very good engagement.
Yeah.
Certainly the discussions that we've had, and if you recall at the Featherston meeting, people always seem to be quite happy and previous engagement with the proposals. We know that people are more motivated to submit if they're not happy with the proposals. So I wouldn't necessarily use it, but
That's a negative, yeah.
Round of applause at that spatial plan.
Which takes us to, would you like to hear from Kendall in terms of the 5 themes? It will echo what you heard from people over the last few days.
So on the visiting, do we do a breakdown of age?
Yeah. Yeah.
I
But at the top.
the new arrivals were actually accepting what was there, whereas my feeling of meetings with a lot of it was the older residents.
That was one at the top.
I think
I saw that.
45% were between the ages of 45 and 65.
And but closely 39% over 65. So it's there's not a
The younger people aren't that interested in engaging.
15% is not a bad number for the younger.
yeah, 31 to 44.
Actually, yeah,
So
15% are between
31, 44.
And the other shift to note is that from last time around, the view that respondents conveyed that there was recognition that we need to deal with growth has risen from 65% up to 80%. So, yeah.
Thank you, Kendall.
So yeah, that 80% largely came down to us explaining the heritage values and that we would like to protect them and design master plan our towns to include that. But the biggest conflict between the themes was the heritage and intensification, and those conflicting views that if we do intensify in areas such as ME in the centre of Martinborough, that will affect the heritage character values. So that was sort of that common theme that kept popping up. Another one you would have heard is the productive soils. People are a lot more open to developing areas if there's no high productive values there, or the soil's good for viticulture. So that changed people's views, I think, on whether they supported it or not. We had quite a lot about population, and that potentially there'll be more than what we've expected. And that for places like Martinborough and Greytown, a lot of our residential areas are taken up by Airbnb. Obviously, we can't take account of that as part of the spatial plan process, but people wanted us to be aware that even if we provide this growth in certain areas, that a lot of that may be taken up by Airbnb. And the other one was infrastructure, just making sure that our areas can accommodate that demand, and that's where we sort of saw potential for a little bit more support for MA, which is out residential if they were self-serviced. So though, yeah, those are the things that sort of came through in one of the submissions, but the main one was that heritage value intensification, which then you can see when you look at ME, in particular, there was about a 50-50 split on whether it was supported or not, with those concerns that directly relating to moving that value.
Could you comment on, I mean, it seems that there's a public perception that densification and heritage are polar opposite.
Yes.
But to my mind, and from my experience, is that actually heritage was densification, because if you look at the average plot size in 1860 was probably 120 square meters. You know, I'm confused at that dichotomy.
I think when we say intensification, people think, and that this did come up in the submissions, that we're saying big bulky buildings, so like 3-story, 4-story buildings around our town centre, and it's not that. It's more it could be sort of smaller building just with smaller apartments or a townhouse in it. It's not the actual bulk, I think, which people think that will ruin that heritage. Same with overshadowing those aspects. Yeah.
And sometimes residents do get confused by use of the word heritage when in fact they're talking about amenity values. So amenity planning, when done well, should fuse in producing good results in terms of amenity values. Yes, so it's a bit of a crossover topic between heritage and amenity.
And that's why we have said that any in a residential and even mid-residential would be subject to design controls. So that could be light limit or a resource consent process that looks at the design of a building to make sure it complements the surrounding area.
Jimmy?
I just, Russell, we've talked about this, but I think we're going to get more people submit when we do our master plan. Because it's going to be how the height restrictions, what it looks like, the lot size, and a lot of fears may disappear, but we might get new fears coming. I think that's going to, I think what we have to do to decide where we're going to go, and then with our master planning. And Reed mentioned that many a times at the group sessions we had.
I think also bear in mind that Reed was talking about the model wasn't we would go in the dark room, come up with a master plan and then link on people to actually do a cooperative plan.
Yes,
so you know, there's been evolution and iteration with developers in particular. Kendall, would you mind just commenting just stand back right, just give us take a chat before. So one of the things that we're seeing now is because we're doing this work, it's actually people are now making hold on, we're getting a lot more sense movement, people are trying to create more certainty out of possible uncertainty. So in some ways our great work is going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy under the current provisions, isn't it? So to what extent, you know, we've modelled growth, but in fact we're actually starting to create it. It's just something to bear in mind because we're having these discussions. People are now applying for a lot more consents to get certainty. They're taking up the 1 hectare option that was part of the collective district plan to bring the planning provisions in. So do you want to just comment on that? What were you experiencing?
Yeah, so we are getting a lot more pooled and resource consents now because we have gone out with this information. As we've talked about rural before, although not part of this, we're getting a lot of interest in the 1 hectare subdivisions rather than the 4 hectare. So they're starting to pop up everywhere. And also in the residential zones, we're starting to see applications for higher density. So some of them that we've gotten at the moment could be maybe one unit per 200 to 100, 200 metres squared. So they're starting to come in now because we have said that there is this demand. We still have to treat that as our current district plan.
Right. If we adopt the spatial plan, which gives notice possibly or an indication, does that change the way the planners look at any application?
Would still need to assess it under the district plan.
Good question.
Could give some assessment to that, but the main document is the district plan.
And technically, that's in many ways. Is
It's just for future guidance.
you're dangerous if we give weight to.
Yeah, totally.
So can I just clarify as well, like one of the other things, and like having read this really good document, thank you, as well, was that about people just saying, but could it be added on or could it be made bigger? And we, you know, we had someone that presented that has an area that is in grapes at the moment, and but where they sit is actually close to so many amenities. So what I'm wondering is, I believe that nothing can happen until the district plan is changed when it comes to those areas. But is there a way to do like an indication, or you know, that area that has been designated in the past as special rural, that's actually been drilled down and looked at further to really mitigate, you know, this kind of thing happening, because at the moment it makes it go like this on the map, whereas it could just go straight across. So
yeah, generally for those sort of smaller areas, we haven't looked at as part of the spatial plan because they won't meet our growth demands. But so we've selected certain areas like say MAMF because they could meet more population growth, whereas those smaller areas we didn't include. But yeah, we did get quite a few requests to expand those boundaries slightly and provide more mid-residential, which is showing that that's what people are wanting. Is that the current 500 metre squared lot area?
Yeah.
We had 5 submissions on specific plots of land. Then is that covered under the master planning, or should this be past the spatial plan?
Both. My view is it's both, because we've got to do our decision making in terms of what's logical fit and what growth areas might be pulled back or others added in. So we do it at that level, then we do it again in the master planning, because you do your master planning, and at the end of the day, you have to serve up a Section 32 analysis, which is analyses why the merits of why you've chosen this option as opposed to 2 others.
So you might then, as a result, propose a slightly different spatial plan that incorporates the anomalies, right? Okay, that'll be an interesting conversation.
And the other linkage that we're aware of and needing to do is to signal that back into the district plan review, so that both are working together. And the opportunity for that in the district plan is because it has to be reshaped to new national planning standards. There will be a urban form chapter where some of this will be captured.
Can I just pick up on that about the urban form that you were just talking about? Because one of the things that I heard a lot was around design guides. So if we're going to look at smaller section sizes, which obviously has to go through a process, or that we have a plan for design guides, so daylighting envelopes and all the rest of it. Is that what you're talking about?
That's been raised as a topic already in terms of district planning.
Does that, just trying to get clear in my head then, so that will be dealt with as a part of the district plan review. Will we be able to have specific areas within our communities that have different design guides to manage for heritage value or to manage for a particular type of amenity?
Normally it's one for residential or heritage areas, or heritage areas in the commercial zone, for example.
So say like looking at Martinborough, there could be a different one for ME, in a residential, and then for the outer area can be a different design guideline, depending on what's wanting to be achieved.
So, you know, it's a difference if you're trying to maintain rural character versus urban environment. So you would have a design guide, both those type of.
I just see.
And the point is, it's not just a matter of saying it's density.
That was what I heard from people was, if we're going to talk about density, then we need to have a very different look at what that actually means and looks like, and rather than having a 400 metre square section and a thumping great footprint of the house on that maybe we better to have an 800 square metre section with 3 co-joined dwellings on it with a different design guide. So I think I'm really interested in that element, and that we will address that through a master planning and design guide process, won't we?
But what you're also signalling is something for the district plan as well, in terms of potential uncomfortability with the existing 400 or 500 square metre density allowance.
I just,
Small.
So is this the appropriate way to fix some of the anomalies we have on the fringes? And we use 2 examples. We've got the Jellicoe Street or Papawai Road, where you've got some houses under the old district plan and some houses under the district plan before that, and yet they're neighbours and they've got different rules around. Can we fix all that as part of this process?
No, you can't fix it, but you can give the indication that you're going to.
No, yeah, that's what I meant.
So that's that question. So the geospatial plans is around saying where you are planning for growth to go. The district plan is where what runs through the district that anchors it and then fixes the.
Yeah, so but if we give an indication of this, then we can use this in the district plan to say this is what the people of South Warburg are thinking. And this is how we're going to fix this problem. So it's treated as an indication of what we're planning to do.
I just, you know, I mean, I just went away and to me, looking at this map, I see a real opportunity for something that Harry, you brought up right before this went out, and that was about looking at ways that, you know, it's the traffic bypass, and the reality is that after thank you, I don't even know, it was like I've just never even heard it before, but if there was that inclusion of one part, it would mean that a bypass could actually go and not go past the school at all. It could end up going straight down to Ferry Road and bringing it out at the end of Martinborough. And so that, so would this be the right place to actually do that indication as well, that we'd actually be wanting to change that whole bypass, but for safety reasons?
Yeah, so remember the next tranche of the spatial planning exercise, next block will be things about commercial and industrial. Okay, so when that's the bit that actually starts with transport as well. So you obviously want to try and get the heavy transport out of this area, but it's got to connect where you're going to have your freight yards.
That's right.
Those types of
I know.
So that's a piece of work. That's the second piece of work, and then you build the roading network. But certainly, you'd want to be planning your residential, so it's not going to go through where you think you're going to be putting it.
So at what stage do you bring in designations of things? Because as soon as you put it here, then people go, oh, that's good, I'm going to then buy that land. So how do we safeguard against that?
We can indicate that it's when it's designated into our Kotahi, have to give effect to that designation within a certain number of years.
So sorry, there's a difference between a heavy traffic bypass around Martinborough and a state highway. Right. Because a heavy traffic bypass around Martinborough is a local road, it's not a state highway. So we would have to do, we an authority that can do a designation process. We have rights under the Public Works Act and all those kinds of things, as does NCTA, so we're like, but you have to exercise that. So you have to be very certain about where you're going to locate something like a bypass, because ultimately you could also be invoking the Public Works Act to take it. So it's not just a matter of what Excel will require. So you've got to be very, very careful about that.
That's my question, is to say if we identify in the spatial plan that we want a bypass to come around and miss it and go to Ferry Road, as soon as we put it into the spatial plan, unless we safeguard it somehow,
which you'd have to start a designation process.
So we would do that as part of this. And is there then a time frame at which you have to then actually give effect to that designation?
It's like I can't exactly remember, it's get the Kendall one, but it's to do with lapse provisions. So there's a period if you don't exercise it, actually effectively lapses. And it's not actually that long. But giving effect to it does not necessarily mean you've got to have it built. It means you've actually got to commence some of the works. So traditionally what you do is you go out and do some moving of a transformer station or
Because of course, the biggest concern is as soon as we do
So you
this.
hit something, yeah.
I think we're on, that's next year.
For Russell and Kendall, so when we move on to design guidelines for the 3 towns, does that have to be embedded in district plan, or how does that, that's where it sits?
It would sit in the district plan, and usually when somebody proposes to build something in one of those areas, it comes in for a controlled resource consent, which means we will grant it, subject to it being of a good design and meeting those guidelines. And we can put conditions on it so it does meet those guidelines. It's a fast track consent, so it'd be a shorter time frame as well. It's just another step for us to say yes, it does meet those guidelines.
Just on, you might be able to help me. When do we have to have this finalised so we can dovetail it into the combined district plan? Given the Carters and Marston have done this, I mean, we probably need to get it now pretty soon, don't we?
We need to be settling on something, yes, and the aim is for completion of the spatial plan through this year.
Full spatial plan.
The
So including
residential.
only the residential element. Okay.
Oh, yeah, just thinking your comment there with regards to then having a guideline. Is that an extra workload? I can imagine the complaints and the discussions and the arguments because you're adding another factor into in opinions. Do you need to resource for that?
Well, we currently kind of have the heritage precinct, which is a similar process. And it allows us to look at that design of that building and go through that consent process. Generally, they don't take as long as a full resource consent because all we are looking at is that design. But yeah, it may, depending on the areas and what's it's covered, it may create an additional workload.
But the overall intent is it may have that we're front work to get the design house guide sorted, but then it gets real with certainty because people know they're going to get the consent as long as they comply. So it speeds up the whole process of the other end. So it's cuts. Okay, great.
Through you, Chair, Russell and Kendall, if we do the residential thing now, what time frame do we have to get the light industrial and the other things overlaid into our thing to come into the combined district plan as well? Because Martinborough, for example, doesn't have a designated area for, apart from where this thing's now, but for expansion, we don't have a light industrial area identified or anything like that. And I'm keen that that sort of overlay is included in what goes through to the district plan for consultation this time, combined district plan.
That is our challenge. In terms of the district plan review, it's being tackled on a chapter by chapter basis. So the relevance of rules and areas or the rationalisation of commercial zoning is being looked at under the district plan commercial chapter at the moment. But we don't have a lot, but the way the topic might cross over, say for Featherston, for example, as we do our master plan for Featherston, we would take up the opportunity to look at the prospect of mixed use, where residentials to go, and examine amount of provision for commercial. So it is a separate topic, but we can draw into it as we do master planning work.
But there's another problem on top of that. It's the review of local bodies as well, and whether or not we're even going to get to the end process of the district plan review before we get taken over.
The existing commercial industrial is set up for grabs now. I mean, like Featherston is already designated commercial areas, industrial areas. Are they up to be rezoned?
We haven't given any messaging on that. We can't because we haven't done the work. but we generally believe there's a reasonable amount of existing commercial and industrial. And the other thing you have, the situation in Featherston is you have zone interface issues or uses, some uses happening within the commercial area or rural commercial interface, but we don't see at this point, we're not in a position to say, oh, we need more commercial. We think it's the other way around.
So can I say for Martinborough, are you saying that we are not going to have time to do that for Martinborough to get it in because you, under the combined district plan, you're discussing, or not saying you, but discussion is around the commercial and things like that right at the moment, and we haven't done any consultation on it, that we won't get that in for Martinborough this time?
That's a challenge for us. Our focus is on residential, but we need to bring the topic forward in terms of timing. We'll do that, but again, it's how much we can investigate and work with the community on, as well as doing the residential. So
yeah, could we possibly clarify, as opposed to it just being a challenge, to yes or no, and also with the more crucial one, which is the rural subdivision, which we need to be addressing. Are we going to be able to get this sorted in this district plan? Give us a percentage chance, because these are crucial, especially the rural subdivision is a crucial area.
Sorry, Karen. I think it's important to remember that we've got the opportunity in the district plan review currently, but it's not to say that we can amend the district plan further down the track. There's always the opportunity for a plan change. Ideally, in terms of efficiencies, we would try and get things as important with this review, but we can subsequently amend the district plan.
Yeah, but that has a higher cost to it than what we're doing at the moment.
It certainly does, but we have to be realistic of what we can achieve within this time.
Thank you. I wasn't being provocative.
Remember, you're on a 3-year program for the district plan. So roughly, I would have thought that the question about the rural subdivision, it's going to be contentious, but that is actually, there's not a lot of complexity to it, right? It's more, the complexity is would be the overlay of the natural hazards map, so which is a position where you wouldn't want subdivision to occur. And one of the things that we're doing very shortly is, so there's good certainty of natural hazards area about flood zones and flood risk. I think high risk erosion, earthquake, coastal surge, coastal setback. There's knowledge on those things, but there's certainty. The one we don't have is liquefaction, and that's the work we're doing to map the indicative zones. So that's the complexity I think around the rural area. But the only one in the rural is would be, and I'm just speaking out correctly. We're not going to say no no small lifestyle blocks in any of our rural area. It's where we want some livestock blocks to go, and we're not. I think we'll be the track.
And one of the main things that will have to be looked at, that they keep bringing up about government as well, that's bringing it, is about the soils, right?
Exactly.
So if you don't want to put on prime farmland.
Where you don't know, I think it's actually quite easy.
Well, yeah.
It's just the real question, the hard question will be working out where you do want some lifestyle. I give you context there. So like Nelson and Tasman, they thought the best place to put lifestyle blocks, get more of the fats and stick them in the forests. Find a 20-year forest fire.
Yeah.
Seriously, I mean, that was actually one of the serious issues. So it's not quite straightforward. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, definitely rural subdivision is one of the main topics of the district plan review for a lot of those reasons.
Yeah, and it raises the thing of a decision to be made, direction and decision. Do we remove the existing permissive nature of the rules, or do we also consider identifying areas for rural residential lifestyle? So that's already been started to tap into as a thinking prompt for the district plan review.
So that would be one of the big ones. The other one, so just come back on that. So Russell, just help me, so there's no category difference between commercial and light industrial, so it's all commercial.
We've got commercial and industrial zones.
Oh, in industrial.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So we've already got areas that designated for both, for industrial and so forth. So the question here is there more that we need?
Yes.
And is the, I presume the other one is making sure we're not getting that reverse sensitivity when we're allowing residential to occur in and around, particularly industrial.
Yes,
That's right.
yes,
Those are the
yes.
two propositions we've got to look at.
Yeah,
And
because
so if you took, as an example, one of the things you would want to, I would have thought, would be out here at the corner of Jellicoe, and you know, we've got a mix of industry, residential, you know, you can see that's a disaster rate. And that's the kind of thing you'd want to give certainty to.
well, that's Jellicoe and Dublin.
Because you do have a lot of industrial down the bottom end of town.
Yeah, well, you've got Ace Panel and Tank
That's actually, so, you
and
know,
the bottle, yeah.
some of it's just actually weird. I think it's going to be quite location specific issue rather than a blanket kind of thing.
Oh, it is, but there's nothing identified, so what we're saying is that we've got two very small parks and they're on either side, like.
Yeah.
And
There's no room for expansion.
and we're needing that to be looked at, because the last thing that you want to do is go ahead with all of this, and then the only other spot is right next to something for an industrial to happen, and yeah.
So the question I was just responding to Alex was, what's the size of the plot? I was just trying to pull that back down to give it a sense of what the issues at play. It's not that, you know, some of it's not that big, some of it is.
But for Martinborough, it's crucial, and it's something that the community board over a number of years has put forward, that this is, as soon as we do this plan.
When the district plan comes up, it's really important to get it in.
What we needed to do for Martinborough, as well as look at the residential things that we actually needed to fund that. And
So we don't want to miss the boat with this district plan now that it's actually happening, now that the review's happening. That's so important, and we've waited so long, because you have to wait so long for a change in the district plan. And I don't know how Martinborough got overlooked, but it's, that zoning really needs to be.
Yeah, the zoning will be looked at.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Russell is working on a plan so that we have a sequence, because remember we've talked about a staged approach. So we're going to do residential growth, because the timing of that was to do with the LTP and the infrastructure stuff. The next phase is literally that, is the combination of rural land use, commercial, lifestyle, and the industrial commercial stuff. That is the next two stages. We just need to bring that back in terms of a timetable, don't we, Russell?
Yes. And just for councillors' awareness, and to answer the previous question, they're going out with district plan consultation next year. So it throws up to be able to answer the questions of area of land need, how much commercial do we need in Martinborough, how much do we need in Featherston, and for us to feed that into the district plan for what goes out in consultation next year.
Yeah.
But in a way, we've viewed some of that through the spatial
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
Well informed.
Industrial's major here in Martinborough, because
But the other thing is,
there's some great output on the house.
first, but you also got some concern about what we don't want.
Yeah.
So let's leave Wainawa with the meat industry, the big industry, that kind of stuff. We don't want that. No, we know we don't want that type of development in our industrial area. So, you know, so there's good trade-off here around some things we know, which isn't just about our districts, also about the
So a prime example of great, this is why it's so important, is having our amazing tiny little sawmill group on the corner, and then someone else built Pepper's Parihua down the end of it. Do you know what I mean? Like, so this is where, so people go every morning, oh, these, you know, all I can hear is chainsaws and, you know, so this is just an example. This is where if we get planning right, we're not going to come butting heads with people who go, well, I bought this property and now you've zoned this industrial, and yeah, we've got to get it right and quick.
So Russell, okay, so we're two from here. So councillors have heard a number of submissions team, what do you want to give feedback to our guys to go away and work on, from what you've heard?
Do you want us to go through each of the, logical and go through each of the towns?
I think it's easy to go town by town.
Yeah.
To doing that.
And the comments that came through, some people have taken.
Yeah. A little bit from us, but opening up good discussion so we get your ideas or context.
So we go through the plan as through, so we start with Martin Grove.
Yes.
Yep.
I can give us sort of general rundown, or do we want to go through the specific areas?
I don't know if we need to, like that, we've got the graphs and everything there and you know, like just maybe highlight the main highlights.
Yep.
Yeah.
Um,
And the exceptions, any other points I think exceptions raised.
Mm.
Going through it, yeah.
yeah, so generally for Martinborough, what, like looking at all of the submissions, there was general support for the growth option put forward. They did have general support with concerns on not enough uptake on that area. There were concerns about that being sort of a rich area that isn't going to benefit everybody for Martinborough. So I think that the thing that came out of that was still, even if we did that, we would need more residential areas. So that's where those extensions of MD, those small areas came through, and where MF came up with an option for that affordability and providing choice. I think the main thing for Martinborough is if they are quite open for choice, having the inner residential, the outer and the mid, but we haven't provided enough mid. I think that's what general feedback was.
That was with regards to MD.
So yes,
Yeah.
indeed, that's what you need to come up and
What's allowed as of now and in the future.
Was there anything negative raised in the submissions that we?
Just adding on to Kendall's summary, there was, in terms of the MA area, which we've put a lot of thought into as a group, what the density should be there.
So there seemed to be a lot of comments about reducing it from 4 hectares to 2, and 4 acres to 2. Was that something that came through in any of the submissions?
Yeah.
yes, a lot wanted them reduced. We even had some down to 800 to 1,000 metres squared. Provide the different options, and again, that's something that could be done as a master planning process, or you can have it as a what we've put it out as an outer residential, which the whole point was that they would provide on-site services over a certain area. Yeah.
I know that some of the deliberation, that some of the discussion raised was negating the value of inner core ME, as that it might ruin the nature of the town if done poorly. And there was some mix of views of no, have the growth towards the centre as opposed to encroaching out.
I think.
There seems to be quite a big, well, from the amount of submissions that we got, there seems to be definitely people wanting MD and just but to be expanded. That really came across, and it shows in your amazing graphs. And I'm just like, honestly, this is such a good report. Sorry, just MA. I think MA is still there as an like for exactly what it like, slightly bigger plots and but MD really seems to be that part, but possibly just enlarging it a little bit more too, because that's like I said, that's where I can see a really good option to be able to put a bypass through through town. And if we were looking at it for spatial planning, that kind of thing, road, you know, networks and things would be being looked at anyway. So, and then I'm not, can I tell you, I'm just like totally not surprised about MF being the other really popular choice.
I'm not either.
No, it's having people, you know, having the one of the owners come here and or you know one set of owners come here and say that they're ready and willing to actually work on what it would look like and everything like that, and what the possibilities are of how we could actually do that subdivision would be amazing. And that's not often you get that kind of support.
Those landowners had been, husband and wife came in and had a sit down with Kendall and I, and we gave them an update or education as the process and encouraged them to make the submission. Yes, MF, in terms of myself and Kendall doing our work, we think MF has a potential, but what counter voice do you hear? That is potentially the viability of the land. That's the counter to it.
Yeah, it's just not. It's not even arable land like farmland. Otherwise, that's what it would be used for. It's not like the land's that poor. They've obviously got documentation, and it would be interesting because one of the things that Pete did say was that they had vineyards approach them and they all backed away. So they've done soil testing on there. So it'd be interesting even if we could get the names of what those vineyards were, because we could actually already have the proof without needing to go out and try and get it for ourselves. You know, the other thing that we all heard was that when they made the special rural zoning, they just went, it's this for great land. And yet some of these don't fit, and that's one of the areas that doesn't fit. So MF, and then that plot behind that goes like that, that can go straight across.
Yeah.
Yes, Russell, just sort of going forward, but I mean, my view on Markborough, there's no real objection to any area. There is preference to someone for different reasons. When we do our master plan, we will then go out to the public again.
Yep, in line with what Harry mentioned of a cooperative or landowner link approach.
Yeah, and then that's through the master plan, we get down to the detail.
Mm.
And yeah.
I suppose the question, $600 question, where do you do your master plan?
Yes.
It can't be just everywhere, Jerry. You know,
And yet,
big circle.
yeah, and we need to get the outline
So
right of
that's the whole
what the areas look like
But
now.
I would have thought, just come back to Cliff's point, you know, so if there's, you know, we've weighted these on certain criteria. You know, and one of them is around the soil quality and those types of things. If people come with evidence to say, actually, that's fraud, then we should listen to that and weigh the option based on that information. That's exactly what we should be doing.
Yes.
So, you know, we need to do that research.
Yeah.
See if that changes that. That's exactly the point of the submission. And that's exactly the kind of information we want, not, I just want to go here. You want good evidence, and that, I thought that was really good, I thought it was balanced. Exactly.
Just in terms of master planning, our thinking with was that we would try and do some part of it in-house, and where it's a slightly bigger topic, such as Featherstone, we would get the assistance of external consultants as part of it. So maybe for MA, it's until we need to talk to Ree about it and get feedback from councillors, that we could potentially do part of it in-house with Ree or someone that Ree may know, and doing it and share it with councillors, but have the meaty topic of master planning for Featherstone, or let alone Woodside, if that was to be, if that was seen as having merit. Just trying, we've got to spread our resource or not create too much of a fiscal problem. Just signalling that.
Alistair.
My comment on this is bit more general about everything. A lot of the conversations I've heard around the place and the submissions, that there was a lot of, we don't want our towns to grow. Full stop. So when you put that into the balance against the no's for these areas, you've actually got to take those out because they're not worth the, you know, that's like pulling the ladder up after you're there. And they don't carry any weight as far as I'm concerned. Because we are in the game of actually saying to people, if the town is going to grow, this is where we will let it grow. We're not saying we are going to grow the town.
Yeah.
So
we don't own that
there is a very big difference in the conversation by saying, you know, we're not developers. We're just saying to people who may want to develop, if you want to develop, this is where we will allow you to do it. We're not saying we want you to develop. We're saying we're giving people a little bit of certainty for their businesses. So people who say, no, we don't want our town to grow, that's not realistic because the simple fact of the matter is we are going to grow. And what we're saying here is these are the areas we would allow this to occur if you come to us with a consent and you meet these planning requirements around master planning and so on and so forth. And I think that's a really important distinction to take it. And what I don't see in the data here is sort of amongst the no's is how many of those are just no, pull the ladder up. Because if you took those people out, it would change the balance, I think.
That's right. That's a very good context point. And added to that is the fact of we are not hearing the voice of the people who haven't spoken, who are in the 50% of we understand the need for growth.
Are there any real negatives we're looking at in Martinborough?
I've got a couple of thoughts. I think I'm hearing very definitely that in ME, people do not want their section sizes to come down less than 400 square metres. There were very few that were positive about the 120 or 200 square metres. And if we're going to do that, I don't see why we couldn't open that up to MD as well. Within MD, we've got 2 submitters who talked about opening 2 areas of land that we hadn't actually thought of. One was quite close to the school and the other's just fractionally further along the road, and those are the ones in Fitness Lane, which used to be Dublin Street West. And I think we need to take some consideration into that as to whether, because they're surrounded by residential properties, whether that is taken into account. The biggest thing I have is that we want to have social, or be able to have social housing within our plan. And the only way I see to be able to do that is if we open up more than one area of land so that I wouldn't say we're flooding the market, but that we're increasing the market so that therefore the section sizes may not go at the same value as they are today, which would then allow our first home buyer and somebody that wants to downsize from their 3-bedroom house to a 2-bedroom house can actually afford to buy a section to do that on.
Yeah, no, you're right.
You've got to have more options, and even if we keep the shape of the town but don't go as big as what we've got our red line around now, or we're going to have to go out, but not where we've got that black dotted line. Even if we don't go as far as the whole lot of that, we reduce that in a little bit, we're still opening up a fair amount of the area, which isn't going to be developed all at once, because we're not going to have everybody of those people
Can't even get a house built.
to do this. But for those people who do want to open it up, we can have an overlay of how we want that area to basically look, so that A, we said we wanted connecting streets, and B, we wanted to look at where the heavy bypass goes and things like that. But we can actually do that in our own mind as to talk to those developers or those property.
Well, I completely agree with you, Pam. I think that one of the reasons why properties are so expensive is because land has been constrained. And that's just putting land values up. If we open up, if we say to people, this is where we see the town growing over the next 30 years, that's going to be MA, MB, MC, MF.
Yeah.
Who cares whether they start in a little corner of MF, providing they meet the requirements that it enables connecting streets to be added onto, services are there and so on and so forth. You can start from the outside and grow in. You don't have to start from the inside and grow out. You're allowed to actually have a little bit of flexibility,
Yeah.
But it will reduce the actual value of the land, which makes it more affordable for other people to buy.
Russell, do you see going forward the lot sizes, for example, ME would be different to MD, or it'll be uniform across the whole area?
Like 400 is what they were saying, isn't it? 400.
Yes, I mean,
across the
we put some indicative lot size per area. MD was a lot more dense to allow for that densification and activate the core of the town. MD currently lot average of 500 square metres, but going down to 400 square metres. Just for clarification, the ME down to around 250 potentially.
I think it was 150 to 200.
Yeah.
150 to
So
200.
that might be a bit too much of a shock for the troops in terms of or a change element for the town. But it's a pretty good question, and that's some info. But it comes back to Pam's question of, if we don't do ME, then you lose the opportunity for delivering in terms of capacity. And if you, for example, if you had all the area at a rate of MD, then you do lose that capacity potential, and you do lose the opportunity of activation. And
No, that's not what
I don't think you do, Russell. If you put ME and MD, to their section sizes can come down to 400.
Yes.
There is always the option for a person or a developer to ask for a consent to do something different. Yes, they probably have to pay a little bit more to do that because it may be notifiable or it may not be notifiable, but you're not changing the options that they have now, because those people in Cologne Street that put the 5 units onto the 1/4 acre section, they applied to do that with a consent to do something that was outside the district plan, and they got approval to do that. We're not saying that we're going to stop anybody doing that. What we're saying is that we want a minimum section size of 400, but you've still got the option to apply to do something different.
Yeah, I agree with you, Pam.
I think just in terms of urban design and urban planning, we wouldn't want higher intensity in MD willy-nilly. So that comes down to back to master planning. If we're going to intensify, we want to intensify around the town centre. We don't want everybody, someone on the street coming in and applying for higher density, and the district plan allowing that, because that will remove some of our character more than what
that's people info.
But then you could have, then you could do like Upper Hutt does, and they say in this street we can do 2 houses on a 1/4 acre section for X number of houses in that street, and once that's been applied for, then nobody else can do it. So you can, it's what they've got, and it's worked really well. Yep, nobody, as far as I know, nobody has complained, and I live there, so I know where.
Just from reading the submissions, a lot of people don't want to be like the city, so they don't want a lot of infill in MD. So I think people would, if there was the option to infill or have more density, then they'd like that confined to a certain area, and that's where we got basically 50-50 support in opposition for ME for those reasons. That if we were going to have more density, that would be best to be in one confined area and designed well. rather than willy-nilly through MD, which that also contributes to our town's character and heritage, is that it's lower density in those areas.
MD was being looked at for 400 metres
So it's
anyway,
currently
wasn't it?
400, so
Yeah.
that's our current
Yeah.
subdivision
Yeah.
rules, and a lot of people don't like what did come out is they're not liking the current infill, what's happening in MD as well, so that's why we said, oh, we could do infill, even though it's saying the same lot size, there's the potential of doing that design guide, so that infill development isn't just going to happen how it's happening now, that there are some other thing components added.
But we've allowed infill development by having a section size of 400 square metres as a minimum.
And
And
it's already happening, so it's like, you know,
doesn't mean we need to allow.
and we don't, but like I say, people aren't gonna jump up and grab this, you know. The perfect example is Greytown and the fact that with the district plan, you know, it took 12 years, I think, before anyone looked to do any, you know, to sell something, but because it was already in the district plan, they were able to do the subdivision there, and because it had already been recognised as that area that could be subdivided. So yeah.
You're looking at all of the-
Yeah,
Oh, the change from the special rule zone to.
yeah, because that had, it had already been indicated in the previous district plan, or in the district plan, so it made it a lot, so it could happen, but it didn't happen straight away. That's what I'm saying. It took 12 years before anyone actually went, okay, now I'm going to sell this piece of land, you know, and I think that the expectation that people are going to jump and just quickly go and do this,
You can't, timing doesn't allow you to. do it.
look, honestly.
We need to break this into a framework that the team can work with. So what I'm hearing is that the submissions tend to focus on the individual blocks, not the whole.
Yep.
And what we're going to try and do is get a sequencing and a coherence around the whole, right? So, which is staged release of land, the order of density, those types of things. And so I'm just looking at the conclusion, because I think it's quite a good summary of what would be back as in each of these 3 areas. That's really what tells you what people, if you look at the balance of things.
Shall we
So,
move to Featherston then? Shall we move on to Featherston?
No, we're just.
No, we don't.
Right, so
Yeah.
we've
got to sort
page 14's summary.
Yeah.
And the conclusions there, I think.
So we had to move on.
Yeah, so
This is something jumping out, it's
yeah,
really
and
upsetting.
the summary tends to fall pretty logically into what Kendall, you, in terms of you look at the whole, what would you be suggesting as our way forward? Yeah.
I think we need to expand some of our boundaries of MD to
Yep.
include some other areas. Sort of,
So that's like that.
Yeah, there's 2 blocks.
What do you call those? Robert streets.
yeah, capturing those smaller
That's
blocks.
really sensible to me.
Yeah, I think that's and I think that's what that is logical as well.
Yeah.
In terms of, I think it's the other areas that we haven't really got a conclusion on yet. Whether I think that ME is a good option in a residential. I think it's 50-50. I think a lot of the concerns come from not knowing what that increased density will look like.
Fair, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's where the master planning comes in, right?
And
So that's once we
design.
actually drill down to what is,
So
can
what
be.
you're saying, MD is medium density, ME is allows density, but it's very planned
Yes.
density, and it's not urban infill.
Oh.
And that's the thing that it's people got really caught up on that.
So does
And the MF.
MD cover all those other areas around that square?
Yes,
So
outside the black.
outside the black line,
Outside the dotted line, yes.
up to where you get the MA.
Yes.
But then I think that you've got one side of, one area of Regent Street. So in that MA area, you've got the black line doing a dog line, a dog leg round Regent Street.
Yes.
That should go straight through. So it should go straight
Yep.
through, so that top piece comes into the MD area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that make good sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
What? What's?
So where,
Show me how you want it to look.
okay, so where you are, see, you've got here Regent Street, this piece here.
Oh, yes,
is in
yeah.
MD, but this piece doesn't. I'm saying that this line should go
Right.
straight up.
Yes,
You
yes,
don't have to-
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Or B, and there was something else I thought of along that line, sorry.
Northeast side.
So you're going to change the dotted line on the top of MD. Those little knots.
Include the extra. Do you want to include that now, or does that come back?
Could we do some more research on that?
Yeah.
Because that's currently in grapes.
Yeah. This grapes.
What, where are you?
Where are you?
The top of MD where it.
Oh, top of MD.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that has, yeah, that's where you have to go, get the district plan.
We need to get some more work on that.
Yeah. Yeah. But at least that indication.
What we're saying is MD, expand the boundaries slightly to cover those two anomalies. ME, keep the, keep, look at that as a high density.
Can I just ask a question? And look, I don't know the answer to this because I'm not a planner, but if one of the things is that we need to stop this runaway land values, if we open this up piecemeal, all we're going to be doing is a simple thing of supply and demand. If you don't open up enough land, you're going to increase land prices. It's as simple as that. There's no way around it. So we really need to open up more land than what we use, than what we currently need right now to stabilise land prices. Otherwise, all we're doing is more of the same.
It gets back to what.
And comes right back to Pam's suggestion.
Yeah.
So why are we limiting ourselves to MA?
So we had put forward MA, MD and ME with, that would provide choice across. And
But it won't, it will
provide
not
demand.
provide, all it will do is allow a little bit of infilling there and reasonably large sections for wealthier people. And that pushes land prices up. Unless you open up more land than you need, land prices will continue to climb exponentially.
So if we
It's simple
expand the
economics.
boundaries of MD slightly,
Yeah.
we do MA and we do ME, then what area out of
MF.
those eight options you would say MF?
Mhm.
And you're happy with that being 400 to 500 metres squared, it's basically an extension of MD.
And
I think you've got, you could have, like at the end of MF, you've got sections there that are 2,000 to 4,000 where the road goes round and it's curved. And yeah, so I think that depending on how far you're going to go into MF, because you're getting down towards Martinborough Transport with you've got there, do we need to cut MF off a bit shorter than that whole area that we've got? I don't know. But
We've already consulted on MF as protected now, so we don't have to go back and reconcile.
Wow.
So if we did those options, so if we did MA for outer residential, MD with minor changes, ME as inner residential, and then if we did MF, that would, you think that would provide choice and meet the demand?
Yeah, well, when you look at MF, for example, it had a huge support of you know, it had the most support, albeit small numbers, but it certainly had 75% supporting it. And
then you've got to look at why the support was there. The support was there because they believe it could be more affordable housing.
That's right.
Yeah.
And also the fact, I think it's an attraction for younger people to get in there. The school, the kindergarten, and the fact they don't have to come through town to go to the train station.
Yeah, I think like this.
Right, we happy with that, Tim?
Right there, there's like a little road that.
Because I haven't seen anything and I'd like
Rebecca's not
to.
happy.
So we actually haven't really taken into account the opposition for ME. So we're focusing on the fact that it's a very, very short percentage of difference between the nays and the yays. And I don't think personally that actually it's a wise decision to go down to that size development in the area. I don't actually think Martinborough needs that. I don't think it's going to deal with a housing affordability issue, and nor is it going to actually deal with, you know, opening up more options for housing. I think it's actually quite, in a way, listening to submissions that people had, I think it's quite limiting, actually. It's not going to deal with accessibility issues around properties because there isn't going to be sufficient land around properties. We've got issues then with parking. There's a swag of things, I think, which will be impacted, and we don't have sufficient robust transport networks in place that it's actually going to take people any further than being able to walk to town and back with their dog necessarily. So I'm not a fan of that. And I'm not certain actually that having an appropriate design guide will protect that village feel that is present with Martinborough. People like the low fences, they like the look. If we start in, I'm going to use the word infill because that's what it will be. If we start infilling into that area, then we're really going to change the dynamic of the way the town looks. And I think our quiet streets could potentially go around town because there will be increased parking requirements for people with increased urban density there. I'm not a fan of that area at all. And that's to put forward the opposition kind of voice because we've only heard the yay voice at the moment. The MD area, I'm okay with growing mid-residential. Don't like the section size. I think 400 again is too small. We should be looking at a slightly larger, small section size. And then I think we might actually deal with some issues that people can put a house on the land potentially and actually do something useful and productive. And I will say, having recently been in Canterbury and recently being in Central Otago as well, that looking at the development and the way things have been opened up, tracts of land have been identified to open up and develop fully before a new area has been opened up. So looking at an issue of opening up areas anywhere, we need to say something like we would do new land for new building, but we would do MA first or MF first and actually have a plan, have it scaled up. Not that we just have ad hoc subdivisions that take place within that, because that's actually not going to deal with affordability issues at all. We have to actually have a better conversation around if we're going to look to open up land, what does that actually mean? Yeah, I don't know if I'm making sense or not, but yeah.
Russell, do you want to respond?
I will respond in this way in terms of it's not an unusual offering in terms of the ME suggestion. It's based around urban activation and potential for good design within a defined area. It also taps into clear and direct messaging of anticipated results as opposed to just allowing the district plan for infill, which Kendall's indicated. So, and it's also as an option, it's good in the sense of you are clearly signalling that you are interested in dealing with provisioning and having the benefit of residential use within and central to your town core and potential for activation of active pedestrian spaces within the core.
So when you say activation, do you just mean people being able to move about without use of vehicles?
Yep, and enjoy it in a part of the of an area.
I'm not convinced that proposal will deal with that. I'm really unconvinced actually that it will, because Martinborough, wrongly or rightly, we did hear from people that said we don't have an effective public transport network. Yep, we can walk to the supermarket, we can walk to restaurants, there's a couple of parks, but beyond that, we're not really doing anything else, are we? And if you only want to live within Martinborough, that's great, but really speaking, people are wanting to get out of, wanting to do other things as well. So we're still not dealing with the vehicular elements in my mind, which I don't think are going to go away. I could be wrong.
And the other thing is, when you don't take up that opportunity, it means you have to find another opportunity elsewhere, and then that cuts into people's concerns about encroachment beyond the boundary of the existing urban form.
Mark? Okay, go Pam.
I was going to say, following on from what Rebecca says, I know that people, no matter how close they're living to town, will drive to the supermarket because they won't carry their groceries home if they walk. And people aren't going to the supermarket to buy one thing, they're going to the supermarket to buy 3 or 4 things. And so we've got a demographics of an older population. They physically will take their mobility scooter, or they will take their car to anywhere they want to go in town. And to have that density, you're going to have more of the same. And I don't think it does anything for the town, because you're going to have a whole lot of housing in there. The only 2 green spaces within that whole area. One is the central square and one is Hungaroo Park, which is behind Warikaka. And so those are the only 2. There's a little bit right on the edge where the pensioner flats is. There's a little bit of green there, but those are the only green areas within that. If you double that or triple the housing within there, it's not going to work.
It's going to ungreen the town as
Yeah.
well.
It's going to spoil, and it might work for other areas, but I don't think it's going to work for Martinborough.
So this is.
Sorry, I'm passionate.
But I think we're all kind of saying the same.
Same thing.
I'm hearing us all saying the same thing, that we all think that Emmy's that kind of density will not keep it with that feel.
It will change the character completely.
What sort of density would?
Hmm?
What sort of density? So say.
So at the moment it's at 400 as well, isn't it?
But say, so the commercial centre, there is no residential density requirements currently. You could build a commercial building with commercial on your ground floor, and you could have as many residential units within that as you want. Just because that option's there obviously hasn't been in Martinborough Hotel, there are units. That's the sort of thing that the district plan currently provides, but just because that's there doesn't mean it is resulting in that.
I don't have a problem. Look, Scotty's building is going to residential upstairs, from what I understand. So I don't have a problem with commercial underneath and residential up top. It allows us to expand our commercial area.
Can we hold back? So let's actually change the whole approach on it. How the rest of you feel? Jimmy, how do you feel?
Yeah, I look, I can see narrative and that. Personally, I don't think we'll see a lot of people that want to build up ME2.
But what we're hearing is the facility's already there.
Well, it is, but why haven't they taken it already?
Because they don't want to do it.
Because it would
Build up.
They think it's just
look,
really.
I'm about giving people options, and providing it's done within character. That's fine. I really don't have an objection to it. I've seen Martinborough grow over the last 50 years, and it's a very different town than when I was young. And when I started going to the Bukit Manu, couldn't go to the Martinborough Hotel in those days. Except it was in the rugby season.
Are we going to go back and revisit ME?
No, let Jimmy finish what he was saying.
I was just going to ask Harry, why can't we do a master plan on the areas that we've identified?
Well, it is there.
That's
Yeah.
But it's what's the nature of the master plan here.
Because if that was done, it would probably change people's views. You know, the bit about you can build an ME now, no one's done it. No one wants to do it.
Yeah, just because you give the approval to do so doesn't mean it's going to happen. It's actually just allowing people a bit of an opportunity and choice.
Speaking of what it does.
So there was a very negative.
But it hasn't yet.
Submissions.
Oh, yeah.
What my concern is, I'm thinking back to Auckland, but Auckland, where you've got someone who's got a, let's say, 800 square metre section, and there you can, under the district plan, you can don't have to have car parks. So they have put in that sort of size, they've put 8 units in, multiple story. And what I do have design concerns around, if you've got a section that's, let's say, 800 square metres, and they've got this proportion of their house on that part of the section, then they plonk a couple of units or houses, whatever, on the backside, it does look ugly and certainly I think reflecting on the heritage values. It's not a good look at all. I think Auckland's done it incredibly poorly, and here we've got an opportunity. From my understanding is some of the older houses in Martinborough are actually on quite small land sites, I think, maybe 300 squares, but they are old and they sit more squarely on the section. So I just think thinking about going down to 150 or 200 in my mind.
It's not just the land size, is it? Because
It's
it can,
the
That's the dwelling that you're going to put on it.
That's on the black one.
yeah, private,
Line street.
Okay, so I think we're going to get to that. But I think we need to more work around, get that a lot more. Feedback is 50-50 argument here as well.
So Elsa just had one more thing to say.
So I just wanted to finish what I was saying before about how the town has changed, and I'm not sure what the street is. It starts with what the street
Cologne.
is. It's Cologne Street, so which is right on the boundary. You know, that has already got quite a lot of infill little houses in there, two little 2-bedroom cottages that have been subdivided in there, and they're beautiful. They're stunningly, almost they're like original railway cottages that have been put in there, and they're beautifully done, and they're used for you know, that is part of the change that's occurred in Martinborough since I was a boy. And nobody's going to say that those houses aren't, you know, people who have come into town will go, those houses have been there forever, and they're really nicely done. So that's the sort of infill housing that will occur. It's not about turning it into in a London or whatever. It's actually about how do you do this in a tasteful manner, and that comes down to our planning rules around what you can and can't do.
I mean, there's 2 very good examples in Greytown, one on East Street, which I think is less than 400 square metres, and there's 4 brick houses. Versus on Main Street, you've got the same, you know, heritage cottages, which are actually very tiny and look very attractive. But the other extreme is they're ugly and they take away from the heritage aspect of the town. That comes down to your guidelines.
So what are we settling on? Because
I think do a bit more thought on it.
we have to get more.
We've got broad agreement around
Everything said,
the level of density and what the form of the residential area would look like. And I think like the community, there's views split. So we need to give that some thought, because I mean the fundamental issue that what I'm hearing is that if you did allow the density, then is that going to change the view approach? Rebecca, is that right?
Yes, that's it. And I think the other thing is about defining what the character of that area actually looks like.
And
What does it look
I
like?
think those are the two pieces that would be.
They are interlinked.
And so what is the character that we want to detect? And then, okay, then what's the mechanism that actually achieves that? Okay, so if we do that, that'll help us resolve that particular issue. Is that good?
Yeah,
I'm good for that.
sounds good.
Thanks, guys.
but just before we leave the topic completely, a subtle approach of whether there's merit and consideration of 300 as a size for EMA.
No.
I think we need to ask that question. So what people want is they don't want to change the field, so what's the design that you would actually incorporate that would allow to keep the village fit? And then what's the density that follows? Not start with the density and try and make it
fit. Yeah.
I think that's the concern.
So say like if, what I'm kind of hearing is say if there's currently a site within that area that's on a lot that's, I don't know, 700 metres squared, currently they can only have that one dwelling. What if in that area you allowed a second dwelling that was, like you said about the ones that had been relocated, that potential one being brought on that's like that, then you can have the 2 dwellings as long as it's of some heritage value. Would that be?
I think that's the things that the comments.
Yeah, you-
Things we need to look at.
That's what you're trying to explore, so keep the village feel.
Yeah.
And then, and so what the design we want to see, because I think this area where people polarise, they will literally be going to either up issue or slicing off little bits and putting in houses like we're seeing down the end of town and that kind of stuff. But that's just informing people. You know, people are seeing those little square buildings, and we don't want those in the middle of our town, the churches. That's the bit that's informative. And we don't want that either.
Well, we can do some more work around that.
Yeah, so do some more around that. But other than that, we've got a good consensus around the other parts of Marlborough. Yeah. So,
Right, we've got this.
So if we look at the conclusions, I think that's a really good place to. Conclusion on Featherston.
I thought we jumped a couple of pages there.
In the conclusion,
Right.
you're saying there's good support for the growth opportunities.
Yeah.
What is the a further consultation on density was requested? What was that?
I think people wanted a range of lot sizes, like same thing, we went out and said, this is an idea. I think people would like to see what that looks like on the ground, especially around the heritage lots and dwellings. Maybe there's corridors that would have bigger areas to protect that. I think they want to see sort of that master planning process before saying, yes, fully I accept that.
So it's like an agreement in principle. We just want to see the detail.
But it's done well.
Yeah.
But there was a general support for increasing the density in Featherston in that area, and same with adding on those other 2 areas.
So which area is that, Steve?
Adding on FB and FC.
Yeah.
There was support for, and same with all of ME. That's the increased density area.
FB was extension of Underhill Road a bit out, is that correct from memory?
FC is Underhill Road.
FC.
For a lifestyle.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
FB, medium density as per existing, and across to the east
And then,
portion.
and if that's the walking, isn't it? That's
the growth zone,
Right, I was really impressed with the consultation that went on at Featherston. I thought it was really good. I thought the feedback we got from there was really good. I don't see the same issues Featherston as have caused issues in Martinborough. I think there is a very strong feeling that developing the inner part of Featherston will rejuvenate the town. And the exact opposite feeling perhaps to Martinborough. Featherston it's almost, the centre is almost divided because of the railway line. So if we can somehow add a bit more life into the centre, it will be really good for the town. And I think that's the feedback we've got quite clearly from the people at Featherston.
I think that's a very good summation.
Thank you.
Points going back to me with the heritage areas, and it's going back to language I was going through now. There's a lot of concern, particularly in the main street, with some of the buildings there should in fact be heritage classified and looked after. That's another battle, but
Do you mean the shops in town? Yeah.
Are you also meaning some of the unoccupied buildings? Yeah. That's a difficult problem to
it's a
solve.
separate discussion.
It's a separate discussion.
It's just that, I mean, we just made, the point was made here, historical areas of Featherston retained, which is, but then not just the Anzac Hall.
So does that mean, have you got a heritage zone like Greytown has in Featherston?
Yes, there is. Yeah.
So that means that would continue to be considered?
But that's part of the district plan discussion.
Yeah.
The only other concern current was that flood zone, north.
Oh, that's
West of the railway station district.
Right.
And it's quite a big area there.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's much we can do about that.
well.
Yeah, it's a fault line.
But that's all noted.
Yeah, so last fall, aware of that, I've done it. Has anybody got any other concerns?
So if there was, you know, the area as you go out of town and heading north towards Greytown, there's that new development there on State Highway 2.
Yes.
Is there any thinking about expanding that? Because I thought it was on flood.
It's flood,
Flood.
but also there is no way in Hades, if you asked NZTA, they would not want any more driveways on the state highway.
And is that not a flood area that's of concern?
Leading up to the,
Donald's Creek.
Donald's Creek area.
Yeah, that definitely is.
But you've got the Hickson Street, behind that, you've got the Hickson Street development as well.
The bottom is, you don't want to drive your ribbon, what we don't want
It's
is
ribbon.
ribbon development.
No.
It's keeping up, going up, cracking up the state.
Oh, no, I wasn't
Yeah.
meaning to say increase the growth.
Get back and stop it. And we're on that one.
Any other points about Featherstone?
No, look,
Agreed.
I agree with Melissa, and the thing that I enjoyed about the Featherstone conversation, when Featherstone are upset about something, you get a lot of people complaining. And it was said, let me finish, please. But it was said before, you got to read into the people that didn't submit. And I think they're quite happy. If they weren't happy, they wouldn't have submitted.
Know about it.
Or they would have come to public.
Oh,
meeting.
absolutely.
Just taking up Alistair's summation, I thought it was very good.
Thank you.
Considering that Featherstone was our kickoff in terms of community consultation, we had sort of medium numbers, but what was good was the nature of the questioning. That's the thing that's-
Remember, there was a reason for the medium. Actually, it was the LTP, wasn't the spatial plan?
Yeah, we did the LTP.
Yeah, the LTP, so
Yeah.
the LTP, we had that excellent Kaitaki. That wasn't on spatial.
no, the consultation was good.
That was good,
Yeah, with railway stations.
Really, really good comments from people.
Right, so it's great town.
Okay, so no,
Last but not least, sorry, this is a great town. So I find personally the conclusion is quite a good summary of the points that sort of give you the overall balance.
well, the confusion there seems to, well, no, the conflict there seems to be timing with GB, GA and GD. And I'm presuming waiting for further reports on the GC area. The debate about the WAG context there, yes.
And
So they'll come back to us as and when they're ready.
I think we need to work with the WAG right now and look at the maps that they've actually got to make a different consideration about GC. Because remember, they're not talking, their proposal is not about putting stock banks next to the river, it's actually about putting them to the town. And I'm thinking that area is actually potentially, I might be wrong, earmarked for stock banks. Yeah.
But David did, John did say that they're very close to Kevin's.
Yeah, they are.
But they would come as far back as North Street, so they're not on the river, they're quite a light way in.
so you had those two developers or the people living in North Street on the north side of the street. Yeah, they were making submissions as well about opening up that area, so, yeah.
Kimberly, you up with this discussion about the Waitangi Action Group. So they submitted essentially, which is pretty helpful, but they're saying that the intention, rather than traditionally put the stock bank up against the river, was to move it back towards the boundary of the town. So that would change the characteristic of that land deficits, but also means that a number of the urban lifestyle blocks are now potentially inside the floodplain, or they've been in it now.
in
But
one.
the intention was to
area.
actually start the building of the stock bank
Yeah.
pretty soon.
Yeah, it is, yeah. it
So
is.
that's just something we just need, so the nature of that hazard is something we need to take into consideration. As part of the town. I'm not sure, I wasn't sure if you're.
Yeah, I think,
We can't
so is there
have
a
that
conversation
conversation.
draft and then we can draft?
It's literally on the point.
Yeah.
Correct notes.
They've had input from staff of Greater Wellington
Yes.
as well.
It's unlikely the maps will change much, eh, Russell? Yeah.
Yeah.
But we can work with the WAG and we can get access to those maps and have a look and bring that into our thinking.
The other thing to note for GC area is portion of land, soil classification, category 1.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
It's a limiter there as well.
Oh, I've got this view about
It's a down floodway in the middle too.
there was a
Yeah,
woman who
could I,
presented and it's.
Could I just make a comment about the Woodside station? Certainly those that understand why we put it there are very supportive of it, actually, very supportive. But the one comment that everybody has said to me so far, I said, we've got our circle going into the floodplain. So if we're going to take the circle out of the floodplain, you know, so let's try and be a bit cleverer the way we do our maps. You know, that whilst we've said it may well be in the sort of 20 to 30 year period, I think if we get this across the board and everything, I think you'll find that there may well be a lot more interest in bringing that forward quite a long time frame. The other thing, and I mentioned earlier about the GB area, I just think one, we need to make sure that we heard a lot about the soil and the ability to build on there. So perhaps we just need to do a little check and make sure that
The same reason we're talking.
yeah. But also, and I mentioned earlier about the top end of Papawai Road where we've got houses as you come up Papawai Road to Greytown, you've got houses on the left-hand side. That's right.
Yeah.
On the left-hand side that is just outside our little red line. That probably need to be brought back in because they're surrounded by a whole lot of different planning rules and there's not one house is the same as the next. So if we just tidy it up a little bit while we're there, would be good.
Yeah.
Just thinking about GB, would you perform some more analysis on flooding, soil, that kind of thing?
Yes. Yeah.
Remember, that's the sort of next steps.
Yeah, I know, but
That kind of stuff will happen.
but that was what the majority of the negatives came from that, particularly concerns around flooding.
I think a lot of them thought it was a logical area, it was just whether it could,
Sustain.
yeah.
Yeah, initial consideration in terms of the matrix assessment involved Wellington Water and Lawrence in terms of that, but it was signalled as an issue and we'll carry that issue forward for investigation. The only other thing I would suggest or just prompt for councillors to get a steer on for GB is any merit or need in terms of reducing the amount of area in GB.
About to ask the same thing, Russell. Yeah, I think there's, well, actually Graham Gray talked about it in his submission yesterday and I've got a lot of respect for Graham. He's been in the area for years and he knows that area well, as do a number of other folk that came and spoke to us and said it's too wet. But parts of it may actually be appropriate for development. And he talked about not going beyond Fabian's Road, basically, wasn't it? Takes reserve, sorry, thank you, yeah. So which takes it basically, reduces that GB area by about a third, probably a third to a half.
So in line with the B, the bottom of the B, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you could square it up a little bit.
I think literally it's just a literal line. I don't think there's any way.
So maybe we just do some checks onto and then maybe square it.
No, we don't.
No, but you wouldn't touch it anyway.
I know,
It gives you a nice green area.
The other thing is too that there was quite a bit of appetite to look into development of GA because the majority of the town at the moment is actually on the GA side. The access to infrastructure there that's all on-site water supply, wastewater, which just brings up a whole other conversation around how you manage your infrastructure in that particular area. But it's a better building platform than GB because of the soils, and it's also not class 1 from memory.
The only issue I have, and I agree with what you said, but the only issue I have with that is that you're then extending the town down State Highway 1, and you're extending it up into the corridor or along the corridor. We've said we don't want to expand that way, and it's sort of,
One of the reasons we against that because of
that ribbon development thing. But I agree with everything you said. I can see why. But it's also
Except that it wouldn't look like ribbon development because it's against a rail corridor, which is currently being used as a rail trail. Yeah, so that ribbon development's not there, and you wouldn't have access ways off the state highway. You'd actually be able to plan in that area some really nice streetscapes and other just. We heard those.
But I suppose I come back to my overarching comment that I talked about supply of land. And, you know, if we want to actually keep land values affordable for people and you know, you two that live in there already know it's very hard to find people to work in the cafes and the thing because they can't afford to live there. So if we want to make sure that people can live there and still provide the services for everything that people go there for, well, we need to provide land, and maybe GB and GA is a necessity to try and stabilise land.
Now, yeah, particularly if we scale back on GB, that GA would potentially need to be opened up.
Yeah.
Just and also thinking about housing affordability. Graham Gray and a couple of other builder folk that I've spoken to. I mean, if we have an area, sure, we can build on it, we can engineer for just about anything, but the additional cost to engineer for an appropriate flooring situation for a house is huge. You know, engineer piles and a concrete floor is massively expensive. If we don't have to do engineered piles, it actually makes it a more affordable option for people as well.
That's why the liquefaction is very.
It's going to be really important. Yeah.
And if you take that GC out because you're going to bring the stock bank down there, then you are going to actually need both of those.
You'll need both those areas.
Still quite a few sections available in GF. There's still quite a lot.
Oh, no, sorry, I was saying GC.
GC.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
sorry. I was just
If you take the price of GF though, that's very high land values in the GF region, and it's not going to do anything for the long-term sustainability of the town.
Well, not if you can sell a 530 square metre section for $530,000.
Yes.
You know, that's really expensive.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. So, yeah, forget about it. With housing affordability, that's just.
In terms of timing,
Everything,
some people said do we need to wait to 3 years for the Greytown one to go ahead, and do we need to wait on GD in terms of timing? The recommendation was we do it we look at the Greytown after the
I still
So that last one.
recommendation was we look at Greytown after Marston Borough and Featherston, so it would be 3 years out.
Yes. In terms of being able to do our work in a sequence, but we recognise that some members of the public are not wanting Greytown left out, and you know the third poor cousin. So not sure.
Can we wait that long with the district plan coming up?
Not really.
no.
Which unless you do.
I mean, all that part has to be done. But interestingly enough, you know, like it's very even, like on what people want, but opposing. So it's a tough one to actually make calls on, because it's like GB option 40% opposed, 53% of support, and 7 don't know, and then it's like 41% want smaller lots and 42% want larger lots.
So we can get it done.
It's a confused town.
Yeah.
I think we need to have a look at that. I really
We do have enough people to do it or not.
Well, that's the.
Not about the wood sides,
So
but
last
they.
time was master planning on 3 different fronts, 3 different times.
Yeah.
And it's actually a practicality.
Well, we haven't got the luxury of we're not one mid-sized town grappling with growth, inequal growth, and that on the edge.
Yeah.
We've got three little babies we've got to look after.
And I mean, the premise is that there is land. that's been
Not identical.
So if we clone both of you, we might.
We're not at that crisis.
Going to clone
It's a nice
both
to
of
do.
you.
Exactly.
Is this
Anything else?
generic work that you can do that would apply across all three towns?
Yeah.
But the great thing, I mean, really, the only thing that we're wanting to rush is just to make sure that we've got something in place to go into the district plan. Everything, good things take time. I'm not in any rush to, you know, but as long as we can get it into the district plan, then it's giving options to our ratepayers. But you know, to me, that's the most important part, is that we kind of nut this out so we can get it into the district plan to make it.
I think Russell,
Open up the options.
What Pip is talking about, we're probably going to get enough information to flag it in the district plan. But the detail will come later anyway, won't it?
Yeah, that's the question of how much we need to feed into the district
District
plan.
plan, like because about the look and feel and all that kind of stuff.
What's been used elsewhere over time is future development areas. I mean, but that's going way back in terms
Yeah.
of planning when southern part of Manukau through to the town centre, Botany Town Centre developed, they set aside future development areas. But
Yeah.
I mean, that's an old planning approach. But what signal, we've got to put some signal, as you say, in the district plan.
But equally, just want to be careful because the district plan can be contested. So if you put too many things that people will contest into a district plan, there can be years of litigation and uncertainty. So for instance, if you did want, for instance, if you wanted something to happen quickly in this town, but you're not so worried about that town, don't put something controversial over this town because it's a slow down the pace of this one. Right? So you can be, I mean, Queenstown, quite seriously, did not have a lot of district plan for like 20 years.
Yeah.
They did.
Because that was contested continually for all. So, I'm just saying, it is not an order, don't be mindful, part of the sequencing is also you don't want to make the district plan so complex. Because we've still got Marston, still got Caston, that we delay the implementation of district plan unintentionally.
Yeah.
Because there's a strong opposition to something. So we're just going to take those factors into consideration as well.
Are there any other issues on Greytown you'd like
So many.
Russell's team to have a look at?
Probably just need to look at the WAG and that's for Woodside
Yeah.
as well. Yeah, because that was specifically referenced yesterday.
Can I ask, I just missed part of the conversation then, I think, Woodside, what did you decide about that? Because I know there's been through the younger people in Wellington that can't buy in Wellington, they've expressed an interest in Woodside because they can, the train goes there, they can commute to Wellington, work on the train, whereas if they go into Ahaha, they've got an hour on the train, but they can't work on the train. So they've expressed an interest in that Woodside area. So I just didn't quite hear whether you were going to put that on signalling that for 5 years out or whether you were signalling it for a longer term out now, still now after the feedback you'd had.
That is the very question we need to answer now. But before we tackle that one, can I just put in a prompt here? Just so we've looked at GB potentially do due diligence and testing potential smaller area for GB and the rationality of where that might be. But you've signalled Fabian's. GA, if that was being considered, we can have, I'm just pondering, we can find an access solution that is not off the state highway for GA.
Yeah.
Would you be,
As long as it's just bear in mind, the other thing is making sure that whatever it is not close to the state highway, because it's always that kind of stuff. You want to set that distance from the state highway so you don't get all the noise sensor, reverse sensor, the noise, the traffic going into trucks.
We could have a green belt.
So it's
down
not just a
State
matter of the
Highway.
road, just don't step it back on the front noise, but it's not necessarily.
When we're talking about doing GA, are we thinking that that's going to be GF size lots, the current 400 to 500, or would you be thinking that's an outer residential option like Martinborough, which is 2,000 squares?
Or a mix.
Oh, mix.
I think it's I just leave it as a mixed.
Yeah. It's already a mix for some of
You
them.
want that sort of flow
Yeah.
from density to rural, that's what you're trying to create.
More in towards the town and you'd be south.
But it's also about the connectivity of the issue as well. So going away from the dead end cul-de-sac style to actually creating a community feel in there rather than what's been done.
Which is one of the problems
On Woodside, just answering the question on Woodside, we don't have any capacity in the next 10 years to do the infrastructure with all that type of thing.
No.
I think there's inevitable, but it does set itself up. It's a good thing to have in reserve if there's a master planned, the kind of if the government wants to invest, we get that kind of alignment, we'll use the infrastructure provisions to fast track infrastructure investment, all those types of things. Having an area of greenfields potential development lends itself to some scale intervention if there's the willingness for government to invest and partners to invest. And so that's something we should keep in reserve, keep thinking about.
Could be.
I just think, so I think developer, basically, we have to do it ourselves. No way, for a very long time, for all reasons we've got. Because, we've got to make sure our infrastructure supports the growth now.
That's
Well,
That's right.
in terms of infrastructure, really, you were only talking about septic because the water line goes right past it for a start. So we're talking about septic. So there's nothing.
Well, it depends on the scale and opportunity.
Well, exactly. So there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong to say we can do a smaller treatment sort of system using. There are small systems you can do before it blossoms out. You have to connect it to the main system.
That wouldn't be the design for something around a railway station. So you're not looking at large lifestyle blocks with water tanks and that kind of stuff around it. Development. It's essentially creating.
Yes.
Use the public.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes. So yeah, you're right. So what I'm saying. Practically, the question was, is this something we'll do now or later? I'm saying it's later.
It's later, yeah.
But it could be something that in the pressure that's arising in the regional growth framework, it's anchored in there, those types of things. So it's not 30 years later. Suddenly said the government will put money into it. Let's go for it.
But it's not 30 years later.
No.
So once it's designated developer or combined, you could go ahead. If we designate it now.
You've got it, it's included in that Let's Get Wellington Moving Growth Corridor, isn't it?
Exactly
So that's one step in the right direction.
Does that open an opportunity for us to apply for some special funding for it?
And just to clarify, that lady's house is okay to be added.
So in fairness, remember, for the regional growth framework, they were thinking about that Woodside thing goes around Featherstone. That's what we're looking at the density around Featherstone, so for the regional growth framework.
That's right, but it's still in this corridor right through the master.
Then we get a chance to provide.
No, that's why I kept it. I kept it.
Right.
So all of the feedback I've had from people in Greytown around GD has been negative in words like, not in my lifetime. So certainly, if it has to happen, they see it as a 25-year project. And I think Rebecca had
Same feedback.
same feedback.
How old were they?
Wait,
We were like 35.
Sorry.
there was a concern that it would look like we were developing a commuter town. And that because of the proximity of the station to Greytown, that actually creating a commuter town that close to an existing town probably wasn't that sharp an idea, that it's actually really not that far out of town, literally to get there. So, you know, it only takes 15 minutes to get on your bike and ride out there. If you go on the rail trail, it's faster if you ride on the road. So we're not actually talking about large commute distances if you're thinking about, you know, the town itself.
No, but you are thinking of climate change and emissions, because then those people don't need vehicles, whereas
That's a vehicle. Yeah. We're all going to be pushed towards vehicles and not hydrogen vehicles, and not too distant anyway.
Team, unless there's any critical issues.
Could I just ask one other question? What's the little keyhole on the northern side? What's that little keyhole there that sort of ducks in?
Near GF, like where it says GF on the map.
Yeah.
But heading towards DA, and there's a tiny little keyhole bit.
Yeah, there's a little keyhole there, and I know, is that an orchard or is
Is that
that?
a tiny little?
No, that's the submission that Bruce Farley put.
Yeah.
So that's the 3.6 hectares of land. He wants to get access from Yule Grove through a property onto that particular part of land, and he doesn't plan on developing it. It's zoned special rural at the moment.
He has a submission on.
He has a submission on.
Oh, so that's
Behind
that's
Rebecca's
it.
place.
and that's what he wants to change to.
Well, he was suggesting a plan change for the future, to future-proof it, but he doesn't plan to do anything with it at the moment.
So
Yeah, so I don't
it could
understand
come
why
straight
we
across.
just wouldn't straight across it while we're tidying up these little anomalies.
Do it now or.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, Russell?
So
You
just
notice
to
what we're
bring it
talking
straight
about?
across. Yeah, just bring it straight
We
across.
will need to just do an assessment on it.
So you're signaling for consideration.
Well, it's just an oddity that's sort of sitting there, and if we're going to do this, I have these little oddities.
Like we say, he may never want to do anything with it, but
It's actually productive land at the moment.
Let the assessment be done.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it's productive land. I look out at my kitchen window every day.
Oh, is that by your house?
Yes, I'm intimately familiar with that parcel of land.
So we should sign up for the next.
Commercial or industrial.
Yeah, let's put it in commercial industrial. Heavy industrial.
What I was going to say, is that actually begs a question of how far does the whole GF area go? Because if you were going to take out that little keyhole area there, you'd actually be looking at taking it out through there and squaring it off. So it's actually a bigger conversation about the rest of the land that's beside that, I think, as well, which is currently farmed.
and so these are pretty, but like,
Yeah,
this is really good soil as well, so we can't, yeah, so we can't.
Highly productive.
That's why it looks like that.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not happy for it to stay that way.
You gotta wind up now.
Yeah.
Just before you wind up, there's something I want to share with you. We discussed it around the dust issues.
Oh,
people
yeah.
buying, acre blocks. When we did the subdivision at home, I put a little notice up there, and it goes like this. This is a working farm. Working farms have animals. Animals make funny noises and produce strange smells. They also have outdoor sex. If you don't want to experience any of these, don't buy a place next to a working farm. And all the sex is sold.
So I think we just found some of our rural side guidelines.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Thank you, GP.
This is anything else, we'll wrap up the lunch animal, and are we all happy at the top, David? Yep. Again, well done, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gareth. Well,
Thanks, Kendall and Russell.
Well done.
So just clarifying, we're not investigating that.
No, they're not.
No.
No, we don't need to.